There's not a chance in hell that this is funny or going to work. And when you see those flat, corny, late-night monologue jokes with no audience, Colbert, there's Jimmy Kimmel, there's Fallon. What they're doing is just like reading off of a teleprompter. So a bunch of really good joke writers wrote them some stuff, and then they're playing to the audience, and the audience is like laughing, so they get this feedback, and they know how to do that. They stand there, and there's applause signs, and then there's producers. There's the warm-up guy that's literally telling people to applaud. They're like, okay, explain to the people. Yeah. Okay, when Jimmy comes out, I want a big round of applause. Let's practice this right now.
When you witness those cheesy, late-night monologue jokes with no audience, there's absolutely no way that this will be humorous or successful. Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and Core are all reading from a teleprompter. A group of very talented comedians wrote them some jokes, which they then read to the audience. The audience is laughing, so they get feedback, and they know how to do it. They stand there with applause signs, and producers are there, and the warm-up guy is literally telling the audience to applaud. He says, okay, explain to the people, okay, when Jimmy comes out, I want a big round of applause. Let's practice this right now. Imagine discovering that Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan have formed an evil alliance, and that their first goal is completely vaporizing as you wake up. Jimmy Kimmel has 2 wild cards with microphones and no compassion, no warning, no mercy. Grab your popcorn, because what began as late-night humor morphed into a tag-team takedown that left Hollywood stunned. Kimmel attempted to respond, but it was like bringing a kazoo to a cannon war. This is a humorous destruction rather than a quarrel.
How can Jimmy Kimmel live with him? Like, Jimmy Kimmel is a talented guy, and I don't think he's like an evil person or something, but he's made this deal where he just serves power and attacks anybody who challenges power. Like, how can... Honestly, how can he look in the mirror and say, I'm doing something honorable? Like, how can he live with himself? How can his wife sleep with him?
Well,
In addition to being a stand-up comedian, jiu-jitsu evangelist, mushroom philosopher, and UFC scream machine, Joe Rogan is most known for being the patron saint of those who roll their eyes at the mainstream. When he turns those eyes against the saddest punching bag on late-night television, things quickly get nasty.
And this is why so much of comedy is not funny today. It's my chief criticism of like late-night comedy, which I find unwatchable. I think it's totally unwatchable.
But also contemptible. I mean, they're collaborators.
They're just like the fact checkers, they're guardians of the narrative.
The world's most unfiltered podcast host is steamrolling the world's most over-filtered TV personality, Jimmy Kimmel. Previously known for cracking jokes from a beer-stained couch, Kimmel now spends his evenings softly launching therapy sessions under the dim glow of a studio spotlight, while Joe is out here on a mic, probably shirtless, laughing at Elmeat and criticizing the ridiculousness of celebrity sainthood. There's something really poetic about it.
Road to obscurity. Nobody's going to care anymore. It's like you're seeing it take place with late night television. Nobody gives a fuck about it anymore.
I know.
And it's slowly, you have a bad business model and you're not adapting.
Yeah, the creativity's gone for late night comedy, right? Like, that's not really a thing anymore.
It wasn't even a fair fight as Joe Rogan, armed with caffeine and DMT flashbacks, recklessly called out the late-night emperor's new clothes when Kimmel made the audacious mistake of standing on a metaphorical soapbox made out of cancel culture and virtue signals. A horde of guys named Kyle, who construct squat racks in their garages, casually called out the late-night emperor's new clothes, and no, it wasn't subtle, it wasn't courteous, it was the oral equivalent of a kettlebell to the face.
It'd be one thing if his job wasn't to be a comedian and to do that, but his job is to be he's supposed to be funny, and comedians are supposed to hold people in positions of power accountable.
Suck up
to
the people in charge.
Exactly.
He's their Praetorian guard.
Yeah. And
it's like the self-hatred he must feel, because he wasn't always, that's my point. Yeah. I mean, Colbert has always been a hard partisan, talented guy, but obviously he's not a comedian. But Kimmel was a comedian. Like, how does I don't understand.
I don't know
how he can sleep.
Rogan has a special dislike for pre-packaged sentiment. He sniffs out inauthenticity as if it owes him money. And what is modern-day Jimmy Kimmel, if not the living embodiment of forced clapdoor? He was once a jester, but somewhere along the line, he stopped being funny and became a Hallmark card with a teleprompter. You see, Rogan lives in a world where the punchline is sacred. You don't sanitize it, you don't dress it up in virtue, and you certainly don't follow it with a tearful sermon that isn't stand-up. It's stand down. But Joe didn't stop there. He went one step further, questioning the entire premise of Jimmy's act, that you can mock common people 1 minute, then pretend to stand with them the next, all while pretending to be just one of the guys. Roger destroyed the story in the same manner a UFC competitor slowly, methodically, and needlessly destroys a paper opponent. Joe delivered the blows as Tucker Carlson was across the nation calmly, loading up the intellectual sniper rifle and fixing his tie. Tucker's surgically controlled smirks were somehow much more terrible.
He might buy into the narrative to the extent that he thinks it's morally wrong to joke about these certain topics.
But it's not just that. He's like pouring hot oil on the peasants from the parapet. Right. Like he's hurting anyone who challenges the king. Right. It's crazy.
It is crazy. It's upside down. The comedians should be poking holes in the popular narrative, not propping it up.
Jimmy Kimmel is. Like, truly. No, I mean it.
You said it, not me.
No amount of money is worth what he's doing, in my opinion.
There are no profanities or bro-science tirades in Tucker's roast. Instead, his specialty is the velvet-gloved gut punch and the raised eyebrow that asks, is this guy for real? Additionally, Tucker did more than just call out Jimmy Kimmel's foray into political commentary masquerading as humor. He transformed it into a live critique. He saw Kimmel as a failed pundit who cosplayed Jon Stewart with worse writers and a louder applause track. In Tucker's world, there is no place for a man who makes his living off of punchlines and then acts shocked when people expect jokes. It wasn't rage, but rather bewilderment, controlled, passive-aggressive bewilderment that asked, how did this guy go from making fun of a bachelor to lecturing people about democracy? Tucker doesn't have rage. By carefully pointing out Kimmel's transformation from class clown to sanctimonious substitute teacher, Carlson was able to turn the whole scenario into a joke without having to raise his voice.
In that case, do you think that's him or a writer? Can't you tell?
Jimmy Kimmel?
Yeah.
No, it's him, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
good. That's a good one.
He's a comic.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, he used to host the Man Show. I mean, he's done some pretty outrageous shit back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, for he-he's and ha-ha's.
No, that's a good joke on top of a good joke.
Yeah, it's a good joke. Funny thing to say. He's had a real problem with Elon from the beginning of this thing, but it's like he's in this leftist thought bubble. Uh-huh. He is in the most leftist thought bubble available, which is Hollywood.
The more serious Kimmel tried to be, the funnier he appeared in Tucker's frame. He was a comedian who had lost the ability to make a joke and had instead resorted to politically correct performance art. It was like watching a magician at the Hollywood echo chamber lose the ability to shuffle cards and just start screaming at the audience while Joe Rogan was shaking his head. As part of a lecture on comedic extinction, Tucker Carlson questioned Jimmy's authenticity and relevance, effectively turning him into a warning about what happens when people who are funny take themselves too seriously. The worst part is that they weren't even working together. Rather, they were two ideological opposites who looked at the same man and said, yikes. It was a 1-2 punch from completely different universes. Joe Rogan attacked from the cultural underground, Tucker Carlson struck from the media mountaintop, and poor Jimmy was trapped in the middle like a possum trapped between two headlights, one yelling about elk jerky and the other calmly citing historical context. Joe made fun of Kimmel's descent from comedy royalty, pointing out that he used to be honest and careless, but now sobs on cue and creates jokes using focus groups.
Even the quote comedians, they were on propaganda duty too. Watch this.
He's also pushing U.S. intelligence to find evidence for this theory that the virus was accidentally released from a lab in Wuhan. That's his new angle to feed the wingnuts, to treat this virus like it was a conspiracy of some kind.
It should have never happened. This plague should never have happened. It could have been stopped. But people chose not to stop it.
What people? Tomorrow he'll blame the Spanish flu on Antonio Banderas.
Yeah. Imagine if you're a comedian and all of a sudden your cue card has all kinds of talking points from politicians and foreign governments on it. Don't read it. You degrade yourself and you become complicit in the greatest crime in.
Conversely, Tucker targeted him for ideological decay. Kimmel wasn't just unfunny, he was a media puppet and a public relations machine for the coastal elite who traded satire for sermons and believed that applauding for the right side counts as courage. While he was too preoccupied to notice the roast coming, it came like a Tesla in ludicrous mode, silent, fast, and full of smug energy. The fallout was hilarious, not because Kimmel responded, but because he couldn't. You just pray the internet scrolls quickly. Kimmel's fans attempted to divert attention with the typical buzzwords that he's brave and speaking the truth, but when both Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson agree that you're a walking contradiction, something has gone horribly wrong that isn't criticism, but rather a bipartisan spiritual audit. Let's dissect it. Joe Rogan made fun of the way a man who used to make a living off of uncomfortable humor developed an allergy to discomfort. He pointed out that Jimmy's jokes now include disclaimers, and that every segment seems to have gone through 5 HR departments before comedy was aired. Joe said that comedy should punch up, punch down, and most importantly, just punch rather than gently nudging with a pastel glove.
That sort of self-censorship and the idea of being a more empathetic person is a good thing, right? But as long as it's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, the problem with that kind of stuff is it continues to go in the same direction where more and more things become forbidden and toxic.
While this was going on, Tucker Carlson unleashed his academic machete. He examined the Kimmel effect as a sign of broader cultural decay, loss of authenticity, political machine appropriation of comedy, and, worst of all, boredom. Tucker views boredom as a sin, and Jimmy in his new role was essentially a televangelist for tedium Rogan. Carlson and Carlson did more than just demolish Kimmel. They extolled a once tolerable, even likable, version of him. It would have been less cruel if they had yelled, but instead they held up a mirror. The old Jimmy, who laughed at ridiculousness and made fun of both sides with equal delight, is no longer there. Now, there is just a sanitized teleprompter reader dressed like the ghost of his former self in a branded bathrobe. Joe's mirror was marred by candidness and pre-workout powder. Every arrogant contradiction was reflected with crystal clarity by the polished steel of Tucker. It wasn't a nice picture gazing back. This was an intervention by 2 guys who shouldn't have agreed on anything, yet they nevertheless came to the same conclusion. It wasn't bullying. When he used to make fun of the terrible irony, Jimmy Kimmel became everything. He most likely believes he is winning because in Kimmel's universe, the audience always applauds when he makes a joke that was undoubtedly written by someone else. They applaud when the joke is delivered, and when it isn't. The constant, pointless applauding is required.
Jimmy Kimmel made a tweet back to him. He said, "Your pronouns are ass and hole," which is pretty funny. But then,
Did he really?
Yes. And so then I read that, and there was people saying, "Please don't joke about pronouns. It's transphobic to joke about pronouns." So they were chiding him for participating in a joke about pronouns.
So Jimmy Kimmel was doing it. He was doing it too.
Yeah, he was doing it too.
Yeah. No, he was being accused of joking about it too.
So they were upset at him, even though he was attacking the appropriate person. He was doing it in a manner which is also construed as being transphobic.
However, Joe Rogan's audience doesn't applaud. Instead, they question, rewind, and argue in the comments. Tucker's audience keeps receipts. They don't buy the theater, and they'll let you bury yourself before reading the eulogy aloud using PowerPoint slides. What happens when 2 of the most outspoken media figures decide to reveal Jimmy Kimmel's true identity? You get the slow, agonizing death of a once great comedian who was laughed out of relevance by the very people he attempted to denigrate him. There was no redemption arc, no heroic comeback, just 2 heavyweights leaving the metaphorical ring with the smoldering remains of a man who had forgotten what made him funny in the first place. In the end, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't canceled, he wasn't censored, he was clowned. Tucker didn't care about punchlines. Instead, he cared about principle, and watching Kimmel cosplay as America's conscience while drinking organic tea in a green room likely triggered his last neuron of patience.
The job description of a comedian is not so different from the job description of a journalist, as traditionally constituted. Tell the truth about the powerful. Comedians are usually a lot smarter, more clever, and incisive than journalists, but that's what they're supposed to be doing. Almost none still do. Adam Carolla is one of the very few remaining comedians in the United States.
And for a comedian, that's the worst fate of all, because when the last joke is you and no one is laughing with you anymore, only at you, that's not just a decline in your career, it's comedic exile. While Joe Rogan probably ignored it and returned to discussing aliens and elk meat while wearing a Navy SEAL on creatine, the cultural tremors weren't ignored. Kimmel had unintentionally become the mascot of everything that went wrong with late-night TV, overpolished, underfun, and dripping with self-importance. Meanwhile, Joe was out there redefining media from a room that looked like a tactical sauna, gaining more influence than any suit and tie host could hope for, but everyone could sense the change. Similar to how someone shoved Jon Stewart into a Whole Foods and instructed him to grin through it, Kimmel wasn't edgy. Rather, he was edible, bland, simple to take, and designed for corporate safety. While Joe was hurling kettlebells of derision, Tucker Carlson's takedown seemed like a cinematic slow burn. Roger's remark was not just personal, it was a cultural gut check, reminding everyone that true humor doesn't come with a terms and conditions page. When Tucker looked at Kimmel, he saw the death of authenticity, which was shown every night to a dwindling audience that was still acting like they understood the joke. Tucker was performing a masterclass in dry, unrelenting exposing, not just of Kimmel, but of a whole genre he symbolizes.
They mean nothing.
I agree. Wait until you hear about this guy named Tucker Carlson. You are going to hate him.
The undeniably big topics, the ones that will define our future, get virtually no discussion at all. War, civil liberties, emerging science, demographic change, corporate power, natural resources.
Right. The big topics, the important subjects like these.
Well, it turns out leprechauns exist not just on cereal boxes. There are a lot of people who believe they have seen a leprechaun. Now it faces an even more profound threat. Zombie raccoons. Honestly, how much emotional support does a snake provide?
Tucker didn't have to yell or even try. He just pointed out the ridiculousness of a man who used to make fun of celebrities now becoming their emotional support system. Even though Rogan and Carlson are on opposite sides of the ideological spectrum, they both come to the same conclusion, that Jimmy Kimmel is no longer dangerous, funny, or relevant, and that he's a TED Talk in clown shoes. It's almost impressive that he's turned into the common enemy of two men who share nothing but the fact that cardio is terrible. The other two individuals who hoard information like doomsday preers look at Kimmel's virtue-infused monologues and say, this is what's supposed to pass as satire, but maybe that's the greatest irony of all. Jimmy Kimmel, a guy who previously thrived on irony, is unable to see his own man who used to laugh at authority and now intentionally loads his knees with tears. The jester has taken on the role of preacher, the roster has taken on the role of roast, and no one had yell it in his face to be laughed off. Tucker persevered, and the outcome was that the same Kimmel was completely destroyed, not in a public breakdown or viral outburst, but rather in the gradual, methodical disintegration of all he had previously stood for, and worse, he was completely unaware of it.